Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thanks to Cipla team for this meeting and bringing me first time to this forum. So, I am in practice since 2012. I have been to so many forums, meetings, but let me tell you, this is my first time exceptional experience in Physician Forum of India. So, this forum का कोई मुकाबला नहीं होगा. The kind of impression that I have got in the last 10 minutes. Dr. Chauhan, the way the moderator, the speaker, everybody is greeted, including sponsors, and the good part, because I come from West Delhi, वहाँ पे average time meeting का start होने का है 10:45 PM. यहाँ पे I was so मैं उसको बार-बार सुना ना कि तुम मुझे 8:30 बुला रहे हो, लोग आ जाएंगे. And then he was so sure कि yes, 8:30 the meeting will start.
सर आज आप लेट हो. यहाँ पर 9 बजे exact start होता है.
Yes, I agree, and I have seen, this is my really so good experience in this forum, and I would love to be, here again. So today's talk will be taken by Dr. Aishwarya Krishnamurthy. She is alumni of JIPMER, both MBBS and MD. So when was your MBBS joining again? 2003. So I have at least some junior with me here. And she is DM Endocrinology again from AIMS, where I am also the alumni of that institute only. So when was your DM over as well? 2019. So she finished her DM in 2019. She is currently working as senior consultant endocrinologist in Max Hospital, Vaishali, and she also has her own personal clinic in Lajpat Nagar.
Where?
Lajpat Nagar. Lajpat Nagar. So I think you can show your visiting card or your address of clinic.
Very close to that.
So without wasting any further time, over to Dr. Aishwarya.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak. So like Dr. Deepak said, since we've actually been to a couple of conferences together, and I think I would agree with
You find we'll do it.
So I think I would agree with Dr. Deepak that this is one of the best audiences that I have seen, that we have seen together also, that it's such an involved audience and there's so many people. It's wonderful to be here. So I hope over the next half an hour we have a nice discussion. I think this audience is a really learned audience, and we would like to share some of our experiences, because the kind of patient set that we see might be slightly different from what we would. So we'd like to share some of our experiences, and I hope that over the next 1 hour we have a good discussion about the premixed insulins. Right. So today we'll talk about it. Without much ado, I'll start on the topic. So today we'll talk about the use of premixed insulins in the Indian context. So this is the financial disclosure, disclaimer. So these are the broad heads under which I'll be talking today. So there are certain unique characteristics of Indian population, not only in terms of our genetics, racial profile, ethnicity or metabolism, it's also the kind of food that we take. And even when you look at India, the different states, from where I come from, where Dr. Deepak is from, where people from are, the kind of food that we take is different. But we all have one underlying thing, that the carb content of all our diets is significantly higher than we see in other parts of the world. Right? So this is one thing that we'll be talking about, how our patients are different and how that translates into the kind of insulin usage or insulin intensification that happens. And we'll talk about the risks associated with uncontrolled postprandial glucose. So if you've seen in all of the trials, they talk about fastings, they talk about HbA1c. The postprandial glucose is not as much looked into when you look at any of the major trials. So that's not like a major thing that anyone talks about, but so we'll talk about a little detail about that. Then insulins in the Indian context. We'll talk about some guidelines and what their recommendations are. And like any good discussion, we should try and integrate what we have learned from the textbooks, from research to our clinical patients. So we will discuss 2 clinical profiles where, integrating this premixed insulin, how it has helped our patients. So then we will do the take-home messages. So how are the Indian diabetic populations different. So am I well audible? The audience in the back? Yeah. Thank you. So this was a study, this was a STAR study conducted over around 10 endocrine centers, and they looked at the 3-day dietary recall of different patient populations. They had representatives from 5 different geographical locations. Because as you know, in India, the food it's just different, and within a state, like I could talk about Tamil Nadu, the way we make sambar at home is different from what somebody would make in Pondicherry or somewhere else, or even Kerala. So every food is different to each part of each state in the country. And so this was a study that looked at what the contribution of carbohydrate is to the diet in our patients. So they had around 800 patients. They looked at both diabetics as well as non-diabetics. They did a 3-day dietary recall, and they looked at what their diets were like. And here they found that this is data that is presented only for the diabetic population. Here they found that if you look at all the 5 distribution areas, the carbohydrates contribute more than 65% of the diet. Right? That is more than the recommended amount. Usually we say not more than 60%. 40 to 60%, there are different guidelines and different types of foods, different diets which decide and tell you how much percentage of the carb should be in your diet. But in our population, most of our patients have a carb content that's more than 60%, right? So as you can see, 63%, 61, 65, 62, right? So, and there was a clear non-adherence to dietary advice. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, this was another nice study that looked at different studies. Here on the left, we have studies from the Indian population. On the right, we have studies from the Caucasian population. So there are 2 things I want you to look at in this data. So here, at any given HbA1c, when you look at the Indians, the contribution of the postprandial blood glucose to the HbA1c is more as compared to the Caucasian population. As you can see at 8.2, not 8.2, let's look at 8.6 here. In the same HbA1c, you can see that the postprandial blood glucose levels are higher in the Indian population set as compared to the Caucasian population. And the second thing that we need to look at is as the HbA1c increases, the contribution of the postprandial glucose to the HbA1c increases, right? So postprandial is like a significant, especially in the background of the previous slide, the postprandial blood glucose is something that we all need to target if you want to achieve that kind of glycemic control in our population. So what if postprandial glucose is high? Why do we need to address that as well? So it has been found in studies, large studies, that postprandial hyperglycemia has been independently associated with macrovascular risk, increased CIMP, decreased myocardial blood flow and volume, impaired early diastolic function, increased oxidative stress, increased inflammation, increased risk of retinopathy, increased risk of nephropathy also has been seen. Also there is an increased risk of pancreatic cancer. So this is all association studies. Again, there is a bit of controversy whether eating postprandial hyperglycemia actually addresses these risks. But definitely there is an association, as again shown by this study. This was a repro study group. And here you can see that the postprandial blood glucose levels are independently associated with a significant increase in mortality. So this what is represented is the hazard ratio for mortality. So the postprandial blood glucose is independently correlated irrespective of the fasting levels to the mortality. Right. So does it have any impact on the glycemic control? So here you can see that more patients, like when you have a patient who is achieving a fasting plasma glucose target, more percentage of patients achieving a postprandial target are likely to reach a target HbA1c of less than 7 as compared to patients who are only targeting the fasting and achieving the fasting target, right? So again, this goes to say by logic that if your fastings are controlled, obviously your postprandials also are going to be controlled. So targeting the postprandial blood glucose level in your patients can actually help to achieve the HbA1c targets. So it is necessary to control the postprandial and not just focus on the fasting plasma glucose. Now looking at insulin in the Indian context. So are we starting insulin at the right time? So this is something that I think Dr. Deepak and I talk about in every forum, that we delay insulin initiation. It's by the time we start insulin, the HbA1cs of our patients are usually 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and patients have been on 5, 6 OADs and still not being initiated on insulin. Now there is a therapeutic inertia for initiating insulin. There are certain reasons for that, some of which could be complexity of the regimens, reluctance on the part of the patient, reluctance on our part. So there is a lot of inertia from both sides about initiating insulin. So again, all of us know this, that timely initiation of insulin helps to reduce further risk of diabetes-related complications. And these are all the insulins which we have in our armamentarium. Right, so I think this audience must be very well knowledgeable about this, the different types of insulins available. So I'll quickly run through these. So you have the basal insulins, among them the earlier used ones, the intermediate acting insulin, that is the NPH insulin. Then you have the long acting analogs, which have retinol and glargine as the first generation, and then you have Degludec and the U300 as the second generation. Then you have the prandial insulins. Now prandial insulins, the earlier ones were the short-acting regular insulins. Then you have the rapid-acting analogs, that is aspart, glucine and lispro. Again, U100 and U200. Then you have the newer formulations, that's the fast-acting analogs, aspart as well as the lispro fast-acting one, which is again released by Cipla. Then you have the premixed insulins. Right. So what exactly are premixed insulins? Now premixed insulins, they have a fixed ratio of intermediate acting insulin and either a regular insulin or a rapid acting insulin. And they come in ratios of 30 to 70 or 50 to 50, which we commonly use. Right. So today we'll be focusing mostly on the premixed insulins. Right. So when you're looking at human insulin formulations, there are short-acting ones which are absorbed rapidly and they last for several hours. Insuman, rapid, acrapid. So these are regular insulins. The onset starts after say about 30 minutes, lasts for about 4 hours or so. They have a peak at around 2 to 3 hours. Then you have intermediate or long-acting insulins. They are more slowly absorbed and they have an action up to 24 hours. And you have the premixed insulin, which is a combination of a short-acting insulin and the intermediate insulin. Again, insulin analog formulation, you have rapid acting, long acting analog, we just discussed in the previous slide. Right. So let's look at what the guideline recommendations are. So when you have decided that your patient needs to be started on insulin, the next question is what insulin we need to start on. So most of the guidelines recommend starting the patient on a basal insulin. And why is that? It's because it is one of the simplest things to do. And convincing a patient to take one shot of insulin a day is always easier than asking them to do it twice a day. But there are certain patients in whom that will not work, right? So today, in the course of the next few minutes, I would want us to go back over the message as to which patients we need to make that distinction and not put them on a basal insulin, but rather give the premixed insulin, right? So the NICE guidelines which works in the UK, they say that you can actually use both basal and premixed insulin. Now RSSDI, EADSG as well as the Australian Diabetes Clinical Practice Guidelines tell us that you can use any of the insulins for an initial initiation. Okay? I think all of us would agree on that we do need to have a personalized approach as to which insulin is going to work the best for our patients. Right? So this is basically all the guidelines put together. So going back to this, so there are several options you have. Start on a basal insulin, start on a co-formulation insulin once a day, or start on a premixed insulin once a day, or premixed insulin twice a day. So this is what all the guidelines tell us. So this is what the NICE guidelines tell us, that you start again. In UK, the system is a little different. So NPH insulin is what they advise, and they can be injected either once or twice daily depending on the need. And then they slowly start to uptitrate the formulation. Now here, I think a lot of factors go in, like the patient cost, the way where our patients are, they have support at home, whether they have enough vision, they have enough mobility to use the insulin multiple times a day. Again, the cost, availability, all these are the things which we would consider when you're starting them on an insulin. And yes, so this is the RSSDI guidelines. So here they tell us that insulin therapy should be considered in all patients who fail to achieve glycemic targets on 3 oral agents, or if you need an HbA1c reduction of more than 1 to 1.5%, you do need to have other oral agents as well. And so you can, again, the RSSDI tells us you can initiate any one of the insulins depending on the patient's profile. Right. So when would you decide to use a premixed insulin as opposed to a basal insulin? Now we need to look at the patient's postprandial blood glucose rise. So if you have a patient whose HbA1c is high, whose fasting is also high, and the postprandial, that is the fasting to the postprandial jump, is more than anything more than 50 to 75, you should consider adding a premixed insulin, because just adding a basal insulin is not going to make it, because the predominant effect of basal insulins is going to be on fasting blood glucose levels. Obviously, when you reduce the fasting glucose levels, the postprandials do come down. But if the postprandial surge is more than 54 to 54 according to the guideline, 50 to 75 is a rough rule of thumb, I would suggest that we start the patient on a premixed insulin. Now, the blood glucose levels are better, so that is something that psychological factors are easy to address if you have a simple and convenient option. Again, if you have a patient whose duration of diabetes is very long, who's likely to have a very low insulin reserve, in these kind of patients, you do know that this patient again would do better on premixed insulin twice a day. Now, in limited resource setting and easy to explain insulin regimen is something that we use. So basal insulins do that. But using a twice daily premixed insulin, I feel is not that difficult if you have actually convinced the patient to take the insulin, right? Because it does work so much better. So there is a control of both the fasting and the postprandial and the HbA1c. So initiation, titration, intensification is okay. It is not as easy as the basal, but it still works very well. Right. So here are the things that we should keep in mind when we are starting the patient on a premixed insulin. So duration of diabetes. So if you have a longer duration of diabetes and you have uncontrolled blood glucose levels that require both the basal fasting as well as the postprandial control, better that you start the patient on a premixed insulin. Again, if you have symptoms of hyperglycemia, like you have a patient who is very symptomatic, there's osmotic symptoms, there's weight loss, again, better to give an insulin which has both a basal as well as a postprandial coverage. Again, if you have an associated comorbidity, again, this goes with a slide warning that if you have a patient who is very sick, who's in sepsis, who's admitted, do not use premixed insulins. A better option would be to go for a basal bolus regimen. But if you have a patient whose OPD wise little unwell, needs a good glycemic control, so you have a patient with tuberculosis who's stable but needs a good glycemic control, they have a non-healing ulcer. So these are patients who they have a UTI which is easily managed at home. So these are all the situations in which you need a good glycemic control, and there you can pick up premixed insulin. Then coming to lifestyle. Now again, if you have a patient with a very erratic lifestyle, premixed insulins are not going to work. But if you have an older patient, usually they stick to their time schedules, they're taking meals at a regular time, then in these cases premixed insulins actually work very well. Again, drug therapy, the patients are on multiple drugs and you need to cut down some of those for whatever reason, again premixed insulins work well. And again, patient willingness, number of injections, frequency of monitoring is slightly higher than you would have for the basal insulin. Now, I would want you to go back home with a message as to whom to start premixed and basal. These are the 4 points that you need to remember. First is, what is the postprandial increment? Is it more than 50? If it is more than 50, don't give the patient basal unless, of course, patient is just not willing to listen to you and he's not going to follow anything. Rather, give them something to not have anything, then fine. But otherwise, put them on a premixed insulin. Now the patient is able to manage a basal bolus therapy when intensification is needed. If the answer is no, then put them on a premixed insulin. Again, if they have certain meals in which they are very high, we have a lot of patients who do that. I'm sure all of us will agree. Like a lot of patients don't eat anything the whole day. They come back home and they have a huge meal because they're with the family. They want to eat more. So these are situations in which you add that premixed insulin at before dinner. It might actually work very well. And again, if the patient's lifestyle is predictable, only then put them on a premixed insulin. So these are the 4 things that would push our decision making towards the insulin selecting a premixed insulin. Right. So a lot of studies and meta-analysis have come out looking at using analog insulins, regular insulin, premixed, and etc. When you look at HbA1c, plasma glucose, there is no significant difference between any of these. Like there is no significant difference in the HbA1c between a premixed twice a day or a basal bolus or in terms of hypoglycemia, weight change, or the daily insulin dose. But what is actually different is that the number of injections, the quality of life of the patient. So if you can get away with just 2 shots a day, it brings down the cost of your injections, and the patient does not need to monitor the blood sugar level so many times, and they're not so overwhelmed कि पूरा दिन insulin ही लगा रहे हैं. That feeling is not there, right? So even though the studies do tell us that the glycemic control, especially in type 2 patients, is the same, but selecting a premixed insulin does give the patient some amount of a better quality of life. Right. Now, all of us are very aware of the 30-70 insulin, premixed insulin, but there's also another hidden insulin which is one of my favorites because it works in those situations where the other premixed insulin don't work. Patient is still not ready for the basic bolus insulin, that is a mix 50. So this is called a high mix insulin because here there's a higher ratio of the short acting analog. So there's a 50-50 ratio of the short acting analog. So what are the special situations in which it's not easily available in the market, and there are certain special patients in which you need to use a 50-50 insulin. Here, if you have a postprandial excursion which is very high, and despite using the 30-70, if your postprandial levels are very high, but your fastings are normal, this is the situation in which you need a higher more ratio of the rapid acting insulin. So here you would use a high mix insulin. So you have a patient who's consistently taking a very high carbohydrate meal, or there's a nocturnal hypoglycemia as an issue, because if you give them a 30-70 insulin at night, the 70% NPH insulin is likely to cause a hypoglycemia. You would want to give a 50-50 insulin and reduce the NPH component of the insulin shot, right? So if you have a patient who's not taking sulfonylureas, afternoon hypoglycemia is an issue, and who's not able to conduct frequent blood glucose level, inconsistent timing of meals. So these are the situations in which you can use a Humalog nasal spray. This I further demonstrate in the case study. So going on to the case studies. So the first case is the role of premixed insulin in patients uncontrolled on OADs. So this is something that all of us would have seen patients like severely in the OAD. So you have a female patient who's 52 years of age. She's treated for diabetes for the last 12 years. HbA1c is 9.3% in the last visit 6 months ago. And the patient's weight has been stable. So this patient has a BMI that's 26, so she's obese, BP 130 by 90, not very well controlled, probably a little bit better controlled. Field examination was normal, the eyes were normal. HbA1c is 9.3%. You can see the fasting is not very high, it is high, but it is not very high, 146. But you can see the postprandial is really high at 255. Right? This patient has a GFR which is slightly on the lower side. Urine microalbuminuria is there. The cholesterols are high for the clinical profile. Liver function test is normal. Right? The reason for visit is that the sugar is not under control. Now the medications, as you can see, this is what all of us will see. The patient is on 3 OHAs, the highest doses, patient is on statins. Antihypertensives, she gives a history of CAD in the past. So what would be the next thing that we would do in this patient? This patient gave a history of urinary tract infection, right? So I would have liked to add an SGLT2 inhibitor to this patient's prescription and add that discussion about the GLP-1 receptor agonist. But yes, in terms of insulin, what is the evidence that we have? So this was a study that compared Lispro premix 25 plus 75 twice a day versus with metformin versus glargine added to metformin. These are insulin naive patients. Here there was a better reduction in HbA1c and target goes with Lispro premix versus glargine. Again, this was an individual study. It is definitely, there will be an improvement in the HbA1c if your postprandials are also controlled. So this is something that we are aiming to achieve in our patients. Overall risk of overall as well as nocturnal hypoglycemia was actually lower with the premix formulation. It was slightly higher with the Lispro in terms of overall hypoglycemia. But on the whole, the risk of hypoglycemia was low. So here the patient was initiated on premix insulin once a day, 10 units before breakfast. And after 4 weeks, the second dose was introduced. By then they had also increased the before breakfast dose to 18 units. And further she was stabilized at 22 units before breakfast and 60 units before dinner. At this point, the linear diet was discontinued. So usually the guidelines tell us that when you are moving on from a premixed twice a day, once a day to twice a day, certain leaders you might think of actually reducing. So in clinical practice, we do, you would be very reluctant to stop sulfonylurea to add the premix twice a day. But yes, it is something that we should consider doing depending on our patient profile. Right? So the glimepiride was discontinued and this patient had a good glycemic control after 3 months. Okay, now looking at the role of premixed insulin in patients requiring insulin intensification. Now this is a slightly different profile than the previous patient. You have a male patient who is 68 years old. Now it's a long duration of diabetes of 15 years, BMI 26, patient is on metformin, vildagliptin, glimepiride, and the patient is already on a twice daily insulin, and we again see a lot of patients like this, 24 units before breakfast and 16 units before dinner. HbA1c not under control. So this is a patient who we need to do something. Again, I would have wanted to add an SGLT2 inhibitor in this patient, had the discussion about GLP-1 receptor agonist, but let's talk about the insulin as such, what you would want to do. I mean, there may have been some reason why the patient is not on those medications. Right, so when you're looking at the 7-point blood glucose monitoring, here you can see before or after breakfast, there is a 113 milligram per deciliter increase in the blood glucose level despite the 24 units of insulin before breakfast, right? So which means the postprandial targets are, the postprandial blood glucose levels are not a target. And you can see that if in case I increase the Lispro mix in the morning, you would risk having a hypoglycemia before lunch, because you can see the before lunch values are again at around 1 liter. So if I increase the before breakfast insulin premix, the patient might land up in a hypoglycemia while in the office, and a lot of our patients also do this. So this is a situation, again, when you look at the dinner, post-dinner, you can see there's a big spike in the blood glucose level. Right? So this is a situation, again, the fasting levels are fine. So if I increase the pre-dinner premixed insulin, the morning blood glucose levels will further drop and the patient can have a hypoglycemia. As you can see, the 3 AM blood glucose is already 150. So what do you need in this case? You need a higher level of the insulin which will control the postprandial, and its effect should finish before 3 AM. So what you need to do, you need to have a higher proportion of the short-acting analog in the premix that you are giving in the night. So what is the evidence? Now this was a study where they looked at, this was published in Lancet in 2015. So here they looked at insulin Lispro mix 50-50 given at breakfast and lunch, and 25/75 given at dinner versus basal bolus regimen. Right? So abroad the premix are not very much used. Usually they do once daily and then they usually transition the patient to a basal bolus. But here in India and Asian countries, because our carbohydrate content is so high, premix insulins actually do well. So if you are able to give a premix insulin thrice a day, and you can actually reduce one injection for the patient. Right? So this is a study that looked at Lispro mix 50-50 at breakfast and lunch and 25 at dinner. So here they found that HbA1c reduction and glycemic targets were similar in both the groups. Right? So you can actually achieve the same control with using 3 premix shots rather than the basal bolus, which requires 4 shots. Right? So the overall risk of hypoglycemia, nocturnal hypoglycemia was low in both the groups, and there was a lesser number of breaks. So what did we do in this patient? We switched the patient to Lispro premix 50 once a day before breakfast and 25 before dinner. And here the dose was titrated every week, and then this patient's HbA1c reduced. Right? So sometimes you can even use a 50-50 twice a day to make it a little easier for the patient, because it's a little difficult to remember 50 in the morning, 25 in the evening, they may get confused. So it's okay to just use a 50-50 even twice a day, that also works very well. And this is what you, this is how you need to use the premix 50. Right. So to summarize, a significant contribution from postprandial glucose even at higher HbA1c in Indian population as compared to Caucasians. Premix insulins are simple to start with a single injection with an effective HbA1c control, controlling both fasting as well as postprandial. The patients uncontrolled on 2 or more oral medication with fixed timing of meals can be initiated on a premix insulin. It works beautifully in them. And the doses can be titrated weekly to achieve the glycemic control. They are convenient and they are simple, and they do help to achieve the glycemic targets. With that I'll wind up. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Very good.
मैम प्लीज करो।
पीछे ही बंद कर साड़ी चला
We had a wonderful session with Dr. Aishwarya Krishnamurthy. And before we start the question answer session from the audience, I would like Dr. Deepak Khandelwal to give his perspective on the usage of premix insulin in his practice, and keeping the background of the talk given by Dr. Aishwarya. Over to you, Dr. Deepak. You can sit down, be comfortable, and give your perspective.
Thank you, sir. So I think excellent talk by Dr. Aishwarya. So I think what she summarized that in India, the premix insulins, they are one of so-called very favorite insulins. In fact, we used to so-called premix market. In fact, as of now, you haven't seen the overall market for insulins. I think that more than 50% of market is still captured by the premix insulins. And there are reasons for that. One, we all are starch lovers. So whether we belong to South India or North India, whether it is Punjabi parathe or chole bhature or whatever the rice dishes in South India, so starch contributes to significant in our diet, and that is contributing to significant element of post-meal hyperglycemia. That is one reason. Second reason, by the time we initiate insulins, the average HbA1c is like 9.5. And that point of time, single dose of basal insulin is not going to work. And these are two reasons that premix insulins generally in twice daily doses is something what is our patients needed at the time of initiation. So then I think I can maybe comments from Dr. Chauhan sir, and maybe we can go for question answer.
Yes, there is a lot of question answered. Dr. Aishwarya, wonderful deliberations. I would like to ask you some basic questions from a physician's perspective. You mentioned about the right time of starting insulins. And we know from UKPDS data that even in the insulin arm trial which was conducted from 1977 to 1997, and then a physician follow-up of another 10 years till 2007, and even now the trial is going on. There was a problem with the macrovascular front. There was very impressive result in the microvascular arm, but there were very poor results even the macrovascular arm, even in the insulin group. In the light of what we have seen in last about 1 decade, since the arrival of SGLT2 inhibitors and DPP4 inhibitors, wonderful results in macrovascular front. And with SGLT2 inhibitors with heparin, we see 38% reduction in CV mortality, 32% reduction in overall mortality. Do you think that if my patient is not controlled at an HbA1c of 8.5%, should I consider insulin or should I consider SGLT2 inhibitors? You have the mic back.
Thank you, sir. Sir, SGLT2 inhibitors have to be there very high up in the therapeutic algorithm. The first thing that we need to decide is CVD hai, nahi hai. Metformin SGLT2 inhibitors should be in the patient prescription, and later on the other things come in. So, but still, if you have a patient who is having more than 3 OHs, I would definitely, with the HbA1c which is not on target, I would definitely consider adding insulin. But yes, SGLT2 inhibitors, if there are no contraindications like say recurrent infections or no current infection or impending surgery, definitely it will have to be in the prescription as well.
I am again coming to the same question, and Dr. Deepak will answer that question. 2/3 of all diabetics, especially in the South Asian population, they have subclinical ASCVD. We know that. There is data for it. My question is that should I be worried about ASCVD and cardiovascular outcomes, or should I be worried about HbA1c? Are we not moving from a glucocentric approach to an outcome-based approach?
Definitely, so right now our targets are not just glucocentric, it's glucovascular, renoprotective. It's basically we want to cover everything with one treatment. So it's not just about achieving the glycemic targets, but using medications which will help to prevent the other complications as well.
I would also like to bring in the very well conducted, very well constructed trial called the Accord Intensive Trial, in which they went beyond the lines and they tried to achieve an HbA1c of 6.5 or less. And they found that in those patients in which they were trying to achieve that kind of a target, the CV outcomes were actually worse, even to the tune of twice as compared to the normal population. So if, although it was done with an oral sulfonylurea in that group, if we try and achieve to do that with an insulin, are we likely to have better outcomes?
So right, as you said.
I hope you understand my question.
Yeah, understood. So basically, now the guidelines also tell us that the targets have to be personalized. So the problem with the Accord, the advanced anti-AAT was that we were trying to achieve a very high or a very strict control in patients who are unwell. They were using extra doses of insulin, sulfonylureas. So that hypoglycemia was actually increased their mortality. But in our patients, obviously there has to be a personalized approach. So you have to figure out whether your patient, depending on their cardiovascular status, their age, renal dysfunction, ability to manage hypoglycemia, all these things. So these are all the things that should decide and tell us what should be our HbA1c target. And each patient will have, and that should be something that we should discuss with the patient at the outset. Because we do see a lot of patients who you have a 70-80-year-old patient, the longevity is, so the glycemic control is not really going to achieve target organ protection in their case. We just want it to be fairly good control. Whereas at the same time, if I have a patient who's 45 or 50 and multiple comorbidities, or they have a family history of CAD, or they're smokers, so in these patients I would want a very strict glycemic control. So that I would want to do, but again, that depends. Every patient you have to make a personalized approach or have a personalized target for both the HbA1c as well as the fasting management.
Well, before 2015, before DPP-4 inhibitors came into the picture, and then for the last decade or so, when SGLT2 inhibitors came into the picture, I was very clear in my practice. I would start with metformin, build it up to the optimum dose, not the maximum dose, optimum dose. I would add, can we have some important discussion for all of you? Important discussion, believe me. I would add a sulfonylurea, starting with whatever sulfonylurea. Now we are using levopride and glyclazide, two of them, and build it up. And then I'd probably add an alpha glucosidase inhibitors, and then go to maybe insulin. So the plan was clear. The plan was clear and uncomplicated. After 2015, we have had the introduction of again DPP-4 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors. I want an honest answer from you. Has your initiation of insulin been delayed after introduction of DPP-4 inhibitors and SGLT2 inhibitors?
So the answer to that would be yes and no. Again, I think if we ask this question to all of us in our practice, I think the kind of patients that we get is also different. And definitely, so we do see a lot of referral patients who are already on, so my insulin initiation rate is slightly higher. But yes, definitely, if I get a new patient or patients who are on SGLT2 inhibitors, DPP-4 inhibitors, do help us to delay the onset of insulin. Again,
your perspective, Dr. Deepak.
Sir, see, I think that there are a couple of things. I will have one question from you before that, my apologies. You have seen an era where you were having three molecules, metformin, sulfonylurea and insulins. Now you have another era, so many new molecules, DPP-4, SGLT2, GLP-1, newer technologies, patient affordability has become better. Please tell me frankly, has the glycemic control really improved in the clinical practice?
The glycemic control may not have improved, but the outcomes seem to have improved.
Tell me frankly, what was the average HbA1c of your patients 10 years back and average HbA1c now?
We do not get bread and butter, Dr. Deepak. We get around 9.5.
See, that is the question.
That is
and
the
then
problem.
we
That is
are
the problem.
arguing for intensive glycemic control studies. Please understand, in Accord and Advance, when we talk about intensive glycemic control, they targeted HbA1c less than 6.5.
Right.
We never go that.
Yes.
You know, we we were arguing that with insulin intensive control, but when we see clinical practice, even if the patient is on basal insulins or premix insulins, generally the patient's HbA1c is somewhere between 7 to 8. You never get HbA1c less than 6.5. The moment the blood glucose goes less than 100, the patients will immediately call up, sir, 90 आगे sugar क्या करूँ? Then you will say कि 2 units कम कर दो. But if you see intensively, clinical trials, you see the protocols. When it is more than 90, you have to increase the dose by 1 or 2 units. That is the protocol we don't follow in clinical practice. So those trials we cannot really apply to our practice, number one. Number two, those intensive trials, they were done with, as you rightly said, with sulfonylurea bridge therapy, which had risk of hypoglycemia. And the benefits, they were actually counteracted because of hypoglycemia and its consequences. Now, if you can achieve intensive glycemic control with molecules that does not cause hypoglycemia. Suppose I have a patient who is on metformin, SGLT2 plus DPP4, and patient is having HbA1c of 6.2, that's fantastic. Because I know the patient is not going to the hypoglycemia. But if the patient is on sulfonylurea, I will probably hesitate and cut down the dose of sulfonylurea. So that is another perspective. So I think what we need to look at the current perspective, new molecules might have come up, we may be focusing on weight, we may be focusing on these factors, but as physicians or as diabetologists or endocrinologists, our priorities should be for good glycemic control. Unfortunately, still in practice, for majority of patients, 70 to 80% of patients, we are still not able to achieve HbA1c less than 7, and we are unnecessarily arguing for intensive glycemic control.
That's a point well taken, both from you and from Dr. Aishwarya. My last question to both of you, very educated, very erudite endocrinologists. Weight has assumed a very central position in the management of diabetes. When we start patients on premix insulins or insulins, we know insulin is a growth hormone. Therefore, weight takes a backseat and takes a beating. How do we address the issue in practice of balancing glycemic control versus weight, diabesity? Anyone of you can
So,
take.
if the patient is tolerating SGLT2 inhibitor, I will add SGLT2 along with insulins. That will cut down the dose of insulin. That will take care for the weight part also. If the patient is able to afford, I will add GLP-1 along with insulins. That again take care for the weight. Again, we are too much behind for weight in the today's era. I think our focus should be beyond weight. We should focus on cardiorespiratory fitness. That is one thing. We should also look at the body composition. If my BMI is 21 or 22, does not mean that I am fit. If I am not doing any regular exercise, my cardiorespiratory fitness is not good. If I get my body composition analysis, my muscle mass is lesser. How can I say that just based on BMI? So I think that is another problem with us. We have to really look beyond weight. I have seen so many, you see that there are patients who may be losing weight with lifestyle, and they are generally, you find them much fitter. Sometimes you see patients on SGLT2 who have lost 10 kg of weight, and they are consistently complaining of loss of muscle mass. So that is another issue. So we have to go beyond weight, look at the body composition, look at the muscle mass, avoid sarcopenia, and focus on the cardiorespiratory fitness.
Dr. Rajiv Varde, my friend, my batchmate, would like to ask you a question.
My question is very rudimentary. We have talked a lot about HbA1c. And when we are using premixed insulins, where we do know that there will be a peak after some time, we are also looking at higher chances of hypoglycemia. Now, HbA1c being an average sugar, how fallacious it could be versus a more regulated SMBG requirement in a patient whom you have put on a biphasic insulin.
So definitely that is one of the disadvantages of the premix insulin, that you do need the patient to monitor the blood glucose levels that much more stringently. That's where the personalized approach of selecting the right patient for putting them on the premix insulin comes into play. You're right that when you're using, say, regular premix, the peak will come, say, after around 2 to 3 hours. and it will last, the insulin, the short-acting component will last for around say 4 to 6 hours. So that's the time at which you could have the hypoglycemia. Again, the dose and adjusting it is something, again, cutting down the sulfonylurea at that point would be something that you could consider that is happening. Again, patient education is something that really helps in combating this, at least in the initial stages when you're initiating the insulin. You need to figure out how the patient is responding. That I think you need to make the dose adjustments based on the how the patient is responding as well.
Ma'am, how open are you to an idea of using human insulin, premixed human insulin in the morning and a modern insulin in the evening?
So the studies told us there are systematic analysis which have been done which tell us that analogs in type 2 diabetics, the analog premixed insulins work as the premixed insulins in terms of HbA1c control, fasting control. Postprandials might be a slight advantage, but in terms of the glycemic control, hypoglycemia risks, they work just the same. In fact, abroad, like the NICE guidelines which I showed, they actually said that NPH insulin works just as well as glargine in terms of hypoglycemia and risk of achieving glycemic control. But again, like Dr. Deepak said, the trials tell us something, but in clinical practice, I think we have people who use NPH insulin in names and it has never been conscious.
No, I think I phrased my question wrong.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you was that in India, most people have a high carbohydrate. Even those people who take protein will usually take it with dinner. So high carbohydrate means usually with the lunch. So how do you react to the idea that we have a biphasic regular insulin in the morning, human insulin biphasic in the morning, and an analog biphasic in the evening?
So the only thing that I would suggest at this stage is that if you're using a regular insulin, you need to instruct the patient to take it half an hour prior to the meal. Patients who are very regular with their diet and they are willing to follow this precaution of taking it half an hour prior to the meal, use a regular biphasic insulin. Whereas if you have a patient who doesn't have time, wants to take it immediately before the meal, use the biphasic premixed insulin. Otherwise, both of them work the same. It does not make any scientific, this not have to, of course we can do whatever we want to practice, whatever suits our patients. But regular in the morning and a biphasic analog premixed, regular premixed in the morning, analog premixed in the evening, it doesn't add value because again the instructions are going to be different. When you're using a regular insulin half an hour prior to the meal, the analog insulin, the only advantage that it's going to give you is that you take it just before your meal or immediately after the meal. So if you have a patient like say an older patient or someone whose diet is not very consistent or a child whose diet is not consistent, then you can give the shot immediately after the meal depending on how much the carb is on. That's the only important main place that the analogs have right now in terms of the insulins which we are using.
Dr. H.L. Kantru has a question.
Well, there are two phenomena actually. One is called the Swami effect. That is very much I can understand because when we are giving basal insulin, then patient may have when there is lowering of the blood glucose, counter-regulatory mechanisms occur. Also, the patient may then again insulin is stimulated and patient may have hypoglycemia. But in dawn effect, there is hyperglycemia between 4 to 8 years. What is the reason and how can we make, when we are giving this, what precaution we should take in both cases?
So actually there are a lot of
Sir, I think what you are talking about is down effect, that because of certain hormones like growth hormone, cortisol, which starts rising in the early morning, and because of those effects, the early morning glucose levels they starts rising. So in those scenarios, what especially when you use basal insulins, if you use like longer acting analogs largely, it can be little better as compared to using NPS insulins because sometimes NPS may not be provide that long coverage. So that is another thing. This is one thing that sometimes you really stuck in clinical practice and sometimes you're not really able to differentiate SOMO-Y versus non-effect also. CGMS is the best answer. If you can put the CGMS and see where the glucose levels they start rising. So very difficult to tackle, but I think using analogs sometimes that is the only thing that can help. I think when we talk about insulins, I think we that we need to understand no insulin is ideal. Insulins, they have good glycemic efficacy, but the limitations becomes hypoglycemia. We need to understand just two things when we are using insulins. First thing related to the patient, when we take, say, related to the patient, we need to understand the glucophenotype of the patient. Patient का dietary patterns क्या है, उसका ग्लूकोज का चार्ट क्या चल रहा है, उसकी मॉर्निंग की कितनी है, पोस्ट ब्रेकफास्ट कितनी है, प्री लंच कितनी है, पोस्ट लंच कितनी है, प्री डिनर कितनी है. That is the glucophenotype of the patient. Second thing, we need to understand the time action profile of insulin that you want to use. Now both premix insulins, there are two different insulins in one pen, like one short-acting analogs plus NPS insulins. We need to understand their time action profile. As clinicians, we need to make a best match for your insulins looking at the glucophenotype of the patient. Suppose the patient is having primarily fasting hyperglycemia, that you can address with an insulin glargine, and the post-meal hyperglycemia you can address with multiple oral hypoglycemic, sometimes even like alpha glucoside inhibitors. You can do that job. If you see there is a significant component of post-meal hyperglycemia, then you may use molecules like premix insulins. But no insulins like premix insulins, they can never be ideal to cover all those peaks and giving you something like euglycemia that you have is for a normal individual. If you go by physiology, basal bolus is the best regimen. Physiologically, that is the best regimen. If you are targeting euglycemia, like we have kids with type 1 diabetes, we deal with diabetes in pregnancy, we go for basal bolus. Only problem with the basal bolus is 4 breaks in a day, and that everybody wants to avoid. That's why we are looking for compromises. And the best compromise generally in practice is 2 shots of premix insulins. And then, whatever peaks with lunch and those things, you try to address with other oral hypoglycemic agents.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak. Dr. P.K. Mangla sir has a question.
Actually, majority of the diabetics, I think every diabetic is a different patient. Some people keep on eating, their A1C is 6.5, and some people will be very cautious and their A1Cs are still 9. You try your best and they are not, so they are different. I think what we are discussing, we are taking for granted that all our patients are sticking to their exercise and dietary regimens. They are having ideal food. Unless they are exercising, they stick to their diets, they stick to their weight, it will be very difficult to control diabetes. Then, somebody is on OHS, 2, 3, 4 OHS, and his A1C is 9.5, 10, 11, 12. Do you think all these medicines are not working? Should they be withdrawn once you are replacing insulin? Or suppose, a diabetic has a creatinine of 1.3, 1.4. Regarding metformin, I think if you add on, your requirement of insulin goes down. Pioglitazone we are not using. It's a very good drug to as sensitizers. I think your comment on my these statements.
Yeah. So if a patient...
So if you start a patient on insulin, can we withdraw all the other things?
Right. So again, this will depend on the kind of patient that you have. Like if I have a patient whose blood glucose levels are uncontrolled, I would first look at the other things like HbA, how much is the creatinine, whether I need to withdraw any of the medications because the GFR is too low to support any particular medications, say metformin, or you want to change it from any of the other gliptins to linagliptin. But I would be very uncomfortable to completely withdraw all the OHAs unless there is some pending reason, or I'm putting them on a basal bolus regimen, or say twice daily premixed. Again, it does take some time for the patient to acquire the insulin, start it, get the dose. So I would, if safety permits and if there is no other contraindication, I would keep at least a metformin as an insulin sensitizer, like you rightly said. So pioglitazone, I would be very uncomfortable because the weight gain is immense. So that is something that I would avoid. But keep metformin as long as I can on the highest dose possible, depending on the other factors. Again, DPP-4 inhibitors, I'm very fond of them, so I like to use them. SGLT2 inhibitors again are a very good medication because they do reduce the insulin dosage and they help to achieve weight loss. And of course, they have a million other things, nice things that they do. They affect your sleep, so you have to have an SGLT, retain the SGLT, retain the metformin, taking the DPP-4 inhibitor or switch to a silica-1 depending on the profile, and then add the insulin. Now again, if I have a situation where I have a patient who is going for a surgery, I can't give an SGLT2 inhibitor, I want to achieve glycemic control, I would withhold the SGLT2 inhibitor and put the patient on.
So ma'am, talking of premixed insulins, wonderful talk. And I think after Dr. Mangla's question, I would say a judicious mix of oral medication and premixed insulins. Is that correct, ma'am?
Yes.
So you are not tempted to withdraw everything in one go, because we might.
Sulfonylureas is something that you could consider withdrawing.
Yeah, so the word is judicious mix.
Yes.
Would you be tempted to use DPP-4 inhibitors?
Yes, sir. If it is.
Would you be tempted to use SGLT2 inhibitors?
Yes.
Would you be tempted to use GLP-1 analogs?
Yes.
Good. Great, ma'am. Very good answering, ma'am. We have Dr. Thakur Padmanabhan, who runs a state-of-the-art lab in the town and is nephew of our ex-health minister, Dr. C.P. Thakur.
Dr. Kavita, good evening. It's a very good informative ceremony. Dr. Khandelwal, I have one question from you, and you had asked Dr. Chauhan sir that in his practice he had been seeing different molecules. And should I put on my? See, there are two things. Dr. Mangla sir said every patient is different. I agree with him totally. Number two, you had asked Dr. Chauhan sir that he had been practicing as a physician and as a dietologist in South Delhi, and what differences he had found in all these different molecules. Dr. Khandelwal, you should also have it in your mind or background that all the different molecules have come up now, and patients are aware now. Now patients are aware of their health and their health checkup. I am born and brought up in a doctor's family. You name any relative, my father, mother, anybody, they are a doctor. And my father is also a pathologist. And I have seen many HODs of medical colleges being diagnosed diabetic, having blood sugar 350, 400, first time getting tested in my lab, in my father's lab. So now awareness has changed. And we have to keep this also in our back of mind, that all the molecules are helping us, of course, but we have to go to basics, and we have to see in the Indian territory also how the things are going to change. Thank you.
The question by Dr. Thakur sir is that with all the advancements that we have listed, how is it going to change the scenario in Indian conditions?
Thank you, Dr. Thakur sir. So I agree with him. Yes, the awareness is increasing. There is absolutely no doubt. The good molecules are coming, but unfortunately, still the attitude, the knowledge may be changing. Attitude may be little changing, but practices are still not changing for many of the patients. So we have three things: knowledge, then attitude, then practices. I practice in West Delhi. Unfortunately, still 70 to 80% of patients who are coming to us, they have excuses for not doing exercise. दोस्तों गर्मी इतनी पड़ रही थी, कहाँ से बाहर निकलते हैं? बारिश शुरू हो गई है, प्रदूषण हो जाएगा, सर्दियाँ हो गई, बाहर चले गए थे, किसी की शादी में चले गए थे. They find their excuses for not doing exercise. Similarly, there are well-educated patients from good families. Finances is not the issue, but they are not coming for regular follow-up. They are not getting their H1C every 3 monthly. They are not getting their annual screening done. I am getting so many patients who are coming to me after 2 years, 3 years, taking the same medications, no monitoring in between. So still things may have changed, but still we have to work very hard to make diabetes care better in our capital.
Good question and very good answer. Dr. S.K. Podar sir, our surgeon friend, has a question.
So in these circumstances, you are using metformin as insulin sensitizer mainly. So what is the minimum dose of metformin as insulin sensitizer? Where you are using insulin, but you want metformin as insulin sensitizer because you don't want to use bioavailable. So it's very innovative question.
See, metformin, we generally start with either 500 once daily or twice daily. Better sustained daily preparations, better after meals, because almost 5 to 10% of patients do not tolerate metformin. They can have GI symptoms, they can have diarrhea, abdominal pain, gastritis. So always go slowly with metformin, as Dr. Johansson said, use optimal dose, maximum tolerable dose of metformin. Generally we try at least 500 mg twice daily.
Insulin sensitizer also 500 twice.
Yes.
So you will have to understand one thing: a maximum dose and an optimum dose. So optimum dose of metformin is a dose which achieves nearly 80% of the action that is expected of metformin. And if you use half the dose of the maximum recommended dose of metformin of 3000 milligrams, a 1500 milligram is an optimum dose. And am I right, sir?
Yes. In fact, if you see the clinical trials, they generally talk about 1500 milligram or maximum tolerable dose. Yes.
That's an optimum dose. Okay. Anybody has a question here on this side? Before I give it to Dr. JPS Tulsi, Dr. Shireen ma'am, देखिए मैम उसने मुझे पकड़ लिया था, मैं आ गया, देखिए मैं उसको छोड़ गया.
Hello, I being a gynecologist, I use metformin as an insulin sensitizer in PCOS or in obese infertilities. Which one is the best preparation, SR or plain metformin?
The SR formulation, the GI tolerability is definitely better than the non-sustained release formulation. Also, like Dr. Deepa said, having the patient take the medication immediately after the meal also improves the GI intolerance.
And one more, just a little query. Is this metformin being used as an insulin sensitizer in non-diabetics? Can be used?
Not like when you have a patient with pre-diabetes,
PCOS. Can we keep continuing metformin as far as insulin sensitizer?
Ma'am, it can be used, like it is one of the medications that we use. Again, the studies tell us that the lifestyle modifications, they achieve more than 72% improvement and at preventing onset of diabetes as compared to the say 13% of metformin. So lifestyle would definitely be like a better way to improve insulin resistance rather than metformin.
Can be used for longer period or even after achieving the goal for better longevity.
It can be used, ma'am. There is no, as long as the patient is tolerating it and there is no contraindication, it can be used.
Ma'am, Dr. Aishwarya and Dr. Deepak, your DM Viva starts now.
He is just kidding. No DM Viva. Very simple questions. So let me begin by saying, Dr. Aishwarya, which is the goddess of wealth, prosperity and abundance, and Dr. Deepak, Diya and illumination. So what a wonderful talk we had today. Let me begin by saying, most endocrinology societies and international guidelines today recommend insulin therapy to be started sooner than later, as they have unlimited potential to lower hyperglycemia, and is an absolute indication when you have, you see, glycemia which is uncontrolled with other drugs, when you have weight loss, when you have DKA. So choosing the best insulin regimen for initiation and intensification is still debatable, but premixes insulin analogs probably, better than premixes other insulins like human insulins. This is not what I am saying, this is what the ADA 2024 guidelines say. Let us have the word on analogs, insulin analogs, both of you.
Like I said,
why are they superior to human insulins?
So when you're looking at analogs, when they were initially when they were introduced in the market, they were supposed to have a better control, better glycemic variability. But later on, recently published, is a doctorate review also recently published. In terms of glycemic control, HbA1c fasting, as well as in terms of hypoglycemia risk, we do as well as regular insulins. But yes, there was a paper by Dr. Sanjay Kalra who recently published, 2016 or so. So in that, they said that the quality of life of patients who are taking analogs is slightly better because they do have flexibility in terms of the injection. Whereas when you're using regular insulins, like I said, you need to take it at the regular time every day, half an hour prior to the meal. So for many patients, it's very difficult to take that insulin, wait for the meal. Whereas in case of a biphasic insulin using an analog, you can take it just immediately or immediately after or just before the meal as well. So that's where.
Great. So let's learn a little about the ADA Standard of Care 2024 published January 2024. And what are the guidelines? What are the recent guidelines? They are recommending CGM. And also, teplizumab in T1 diabetes to stop or to, delay the progression of diabetes from T1 diabetes from stage 2 to stage 3. These are the recent recommendations in ADA 2024. Just a word about the new drug, which is teplizumab in T1 diabetes.
So this molecule we have never used. In fact, there was one child which was diagnosed with HbA1c of 6.7, something like that. The GAD was strongly positive, other autoimmune markers they were also positive. I discussed with Professor Tandon and Ames also, but by the time if you see into the details, that child was also not candidate for daprodustat. It is not available in India. Cost is a huge issue. So I think these still remains sort of experimental drugs which can be, like if one child is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you do the family screening, other child is having strong autoimmune markers, C-peptide is going down, at some stage it can be used for preservation of beta cell mass, but from clinical perspective, I think it is plus minus as of now.
No longer experimental drug. This is highly recommended in patients, in T1 diabetes, to stop the progression from stage 2 to stage 3. This is not what I am saying, this is what the ADA, recent ADA guidelines say. Let us talk a little about the other biomarkers apart from HbA1c, Dr. Deepak. So, would you talk about the fructosamine and the glycated albumin? Are they needed? They are recommended by the ADA now. And why should they be recommended in place of HbA1c?
So only thing if patient has some hemoglobinopathy or if HbA1c is not giving reliable readings because of sometimes issues, patient has thalassemia or hemoglobinopathies or CKD, then in those scenarios fructosamine can be used as one of the intermediate marker of glycemia.
So not only that, probably, preconception. As Dr. Shri is here, our gynecologist friend. So when you have a preconception or a diabetic pregnant female, you need to get a fructosamine level because this would probably tell us, glucose control between 2 to 4 weeks in place of the HbA1c, which takes about 3 months average.
सर मैंने ना डॉक्टर चौहान की बात को सीरियसली नहीं लिया कि DM का वायरस शुरू हो गया
and you're kidding as well. Let us talk a little about what else recommendations for ADA. CGM. Are you recommending CGM in all of your patients today?
Apart from HbA1c.
So I'm not using it in mine, other than you have patients with type 1 diabetes and whom I definitely use. That patients who, there are certain type 2 diabetics, maybe not this poor glycemic control, patient comes with, in terms of HbA1c, but the patient has a good charting, but the HbA1c is not matching. That's another situation. Or if you're suspecting that there will be hypoglycemia at night, again, time and range is something that has been coming up as a marker for cardiovascular health and mortality. So that's something, again, cost is very limiting in
I understand. So, again, the ADA today is recommending drugs to be used which have cardiovascular benefits and renal benefits. So, SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 agonists as well to be used, along with probably insulin if indicated. Let me finish by saying about ADA recommendations today on respiratory syncytial virus vaccine, which is to be given now in all for diabetic patients above the age of 60 years. So are you advocating that?
So we are definitely advising the vaccinations government again. Whatever seasonal flu vaccines are available, we definitely have the pneumonia vaccine. These are some things we definitely advise.
So the last question.
My last question to both of you would be regarding tirzepatide. See, OSA over and above the CPAP. Both of you. Tirzepatide in OSA with overweight patients, diabetic patients alone, or with CPAP. This is recently, just 1st of July, just 2-3 days back, published in NAGM. Talk us about the tirzepatide in OSA in obese patients.
So this tirzepatide or Mounjaro, this is still not legally available in India. Patients
recommended.
Yes.
Available in January 25.
Yeah. So patients they are getting from somebody from Dubai. There are some distributors who are supplying in Delhi also. So this molecule
highly recommended in OSA
because
along with CPAP.
Exceptional weight loss. So weight.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Friends, just before you leave, please, I would like to welcome Dr. Vipendra Sabharwal, President of Delhi AMA, and his wonderful team. His wonderful. Sir, please come, and introduce your team, sir, please.
Thank you, sir, again. And मैं हमेशा जैसे कहता हूँ, this is not Dr. Chauhan and friends, this is Dr. Chauhan and family. And जो बचपन से मैंने सीखा है अपनी 100-150 डॉक्टर और 100 साल के से, it is a खानदान का मतलब है कि आप खाते भी साथ हैं और एक ज्ञान दान देते हैं. So I am always inspired, sir. It's an honor to be part of this forum, not as a president but as a part of South Delhi. It's an honor. And I would like to introduce Dr. Pramod Gautam. He is the finance secretary with us. And dynamic Dr. Shalini Pandey, she is the vice president. She is in Batra.